Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another session of our Education and Culture Committee. Today, our subject is the blueprint for Maryland's future, our high-quality and diverse teachers and leaders, an update from our Montgomery County Public Schools. As many know, I actually served on the Kerwin Commission that helped to shape the blueprint for Maryland's future. Was intimately involved in a lot of the discussions around a lot of these initiatives. Today, we're joined by the Blueprint for Maryland's Future Coordinator, Ms. Janine Vaquier, and Sydney Pinkard, who is Future Employees Initiative Coordinator with Montgomery County Public Schools. So we'll learn more about that role and how this all relates to the Blueprint for Maryland's future. I did just want to start off, and I'll turn to my colleagues for a little bit of comment as well. This is incredibly important right now as we speak. Coming out of the pandemic, we've seen how many teacher shortages there are throughout our community, and I just want to say that this is something that we saw pre-pandemic, that we identified was going to be a concern for us. So kudos to us for being ahead of the game when it comes to understanding how important this was to our system, but also not just having people who fill these roles, but people who look like our community, who understand many of the challenges that so many in our community face, who can help to identify with our students, especially those who are often deemed as harder to reach. The reality is the relationship between a teacher and a student is something that is incredibly special, and having more of those bonds in which there are commonalities, we know benefit the teachers as well as the students. And so from that standpoint, we're really excited to hear about the progress that Montgomery County Public Schools has been able to make. We know that there's been a significant investment at both the state and the local level when it comes to growing our teacher cohort here and making sure that we have a highly skilled workforce. I'll just close by saying this, that it's very interesting that in other communities across the world, teachers are revered as some of the highest in communities in terms of respect. We know, unfortunately, that we have not had that same level here in the United States of America. But hopefully, through initiatives like the Blueprint for Maryland's Future, we can see ourselves getting closer to that, to where our teachers feel valued and appreciated and understood as that they are an incredibly important part of our infrastructure here in Montgomery County. There is no workforce development. There is no elimination of healthcare disparities. There are no reductions in crime and recidivism if we don't have great teachers. That's the reality. And so from that standpoint, there's a lot at stake, and there's so much to gain. And so with that,
properties, as noted before, it could also lead to properties that would then, newly abutting properties that could then connect. So although we're not sure how often this would happen, it could lead to additional properties connecting that are not eligible today. If the committee is interested in this additional flexibility, staff does suggest that we limit the properties that could connect under this additional flexibility to those properties that are improved, as I noted in this packet. In my addendum packet, based on some further discussions with executive staff, we suggested modifying that slightly to improved properties or recorded lots. So you could have a recorded lot that is a buildable lot that could build today on septic. And it seemed counterintuitive to require a property to build on septic before it could then be eligible to build on sewer. So the revised criterion I suggest, if the committee wants to go in this direction, is to allow those properties to connect that are improved or recorded lots. Other than that, the write-up here is pretty much the same as it was before. So it's just a matter of where the committee is on this particular policy, whether they want to maintain the policy as it currently is, as staff recommends, or if they are supportive of the additional flexibility that would be provided by allowing limited extensions to better serve a abutting property. And you may recall, and this may jog your memories as well, this issue came about from a couple of category change requests last year, Aurora and Kapoor. Aurora is a property that abuts an existing main. They requested not only a connection, but also a short main extension to align better with the front of their property. However, that extension would, if done, would abut the Kapoor property. And the question is, well, what about this issue? We don't have anything in the plan now that allows for that kind of situation. The executive's recommendation would allow something like that to be considered and approved. So that's sort of the background for why it's before us today.
So sorry. Thank you both for joining us, and do you want to elaborate at all on the administration's position on this?
No, this allows limited extensions under certain circumstances.
Right.
Alan Sukup with DEP. If this option is not favorable to the committee or to the council, ultimately, what we would suggest then is language here that makes it specific that those kinds of extensions are not allowed under this policy, just to make it clear in the text. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Colleagues?
Okay, well, I think I'm okay with the proposed policy as modified by the council to add by council staff being recommended to add the additional restriction, if I'm understanding it correctly, so that it doesn't cause previously undeveloped properties to be able to become eligible.
Right. Yeah, as written, the executive recommendation would allow that to those properties that abut the additional main extension to connect. It would not allow any additional main extensions beyond that. So then the question is, what about the property, the newly abutting properties? And the executive's recommendation was silent on whether there were, presumably any could apply. The staff recommendation, as you noted, would limit that to recorded lots and improved properties.
So if I could just frame the conversation in a different way. My understanding is that staff recommendation is to allow the change in policy so that existing properties that want to be connected can, but then any vacant property, undeveloped property in that adjacent area cannot take advantage of that new hookup. Is that correct?
The additional language would limit the hookups to improved properties. So if there's an existing home, for instance, that now abuts because of this main, they could connect. Or if the lot was, if it was a buildable lot, in other words, it had gone through all the processes to be able to move forward, presumably on well and septic, or at least septic in this case, then they would also be eligible, even if they were, whether they're improved or unimproved. So that would be the limitation. If you just have a parcel that's not been built out, or an outlot or something like that, those would not be eligible to connect. They're unbuildable today, and they would be unbuildable under this.
I think that strikes the right balance, because we've received so much correspondence from homeowners who are saying their septic is failing, or that they just want to improve their house, right? Maybe enlarge it, build an addition or something, but can't do it under the septic system, and are so close to the hookup that they want to do that. But on the flip side, we've heard concerns about growth in areas where it might not be suitable on those vacant properties. And if this protects that, then I think it strikes the right balance. So I'd support staff recommendation.
Great. I think that's without objection.
All right, the next item also has to do with the abutting mains policy, but it's a different issue that also arose from a deferred request. This was the Anine request, which involved an applicant who was seeking to build on an outlot. The outlot happened to be contiguous to another property that they owned. Under current policies, that outlot was not eligible for an abutting main connection. However, because the applicant lived next door, there is some potential for the property to, the outlot to be eligible if there was a re-subdivision of that property and the applicant's contiguous property. But based on that, staff was concerned of requiring this process instead of having a transfer policy that could be dealt with up front and not requiring a re-subdivision process and all of the associated time and effort and work associated with that. So at the last meeting, staff had suggested some options for how one could craft a transfer policy, and those items are listed here. Don't believe they've changed significantly since the meeting back in September, but the bold on this staff memo notes the conditions that would have to apply. And I'll go through them real quickly. First, both properties would have to abut the main. So they both, whether one's eligible or not is a separate issue, but they both have to abut the main. Both properties have to be contiguous. In other words, they have to share a property boundary. They both have to be, or they have to be under common ownership. If improved, the property with the existing abutting mains connection right must have a fully functioning septic system that satisfies all current septic system permitting requirements, including an established septic reserve area under state and county law as verified by the Department of Permitting Services. And actually, this language was tweaked a little bit since September. We talked with DPS staff about their capability to document the condition of his system, and they were comfortable with this language. Ms. Benham is here too if you want to talk more about it. But the intent there is so that the donating property of the abutting mains rights does not have a marginal system that would require a action in the next near future, because under the county's failed septic systems policies, they could be eligible to connect to that abutting main under a different policy, that failed system policy. So what we don't want is in the near future to have the property that donated its rights to then effectively connect in the near future. So this is intended to ensure that, as best we can, that the septic system on the donating property is in good condition and is expected to last a long time. So that's a key element of this. Also, as sort of I've implied, if the property donates its existing abutting mains rights, it can't come back later and ask for a connection under the abutting mains policy. It would have to be a failed system. And then the approval of this connection right transfer is conditioned on the planning board confirmation that the receiving property is actually a buildable lot. In many cases, if you don't have approval of sewer on a property and it has not been tested for septic, it may or may not be buildable. There could be a lot of constraints on that property, and we don't want to go through this abutting mains process and come to the end and have a approval of it without having some assurance that the property receiving the abutting main can actually use it. So that element is put in here as well. And with all of those conditions, staff feels this is a more appropriate process than requiring properties in these unique circumstances to go through a re-subdivision process. And this language is not in the executive's recommended update. I wanted to clarify that as well. We talked about it in September. This is a policy issue that came out of those deferred requests, and staff raised it in the September meeting. The committee was interested, so we've followed up with it today.
Okay. How does DEP feel about the staff recommendation?
This is Steve Schofar with DEP. The county executive did not support the inane or this policy. We were concerned that it would be it would allow too much expansion of the sewer envelope, and we did not support this proposal.
Right. I realize that. And how do you feel about the council staff's recommendation?
If it's going to go through, then we think these are good criteria to use to allow it.
Okay. Thank you, colleagues.
Yeah, supported with the staff's criteria to put, a water sewer envelope around the request.
All right.
Without objection.
All right, moving on.
Thanks, Keith.
The next policy we're going to look at is the Potomac Peripheral Sewer Policy. And in particular, the restriction that exists in both the Potomac Subregion Master Plan and the 10-year water and sewer plan regarding this policy, which restricts properties adjacent to and in the vicinity of the Palatine neighborhood from availing themselves of this policy. Elsewhere in the Potomac subregion, properties may be eligible under this policy if they abut or confront the existing sewer envelope. So there is some flexibility elsewhere in Potomac, but these areas were particularly excluded in the master plan back in 2002, and that exclusion was then reflected in the 10-year water and sewer plan. Once again, this came up this issue has arisen in the context of not a deferred request, but a request that's currently before the council, the Mohebe request. They're seeking a sewer extension, and they are in the vicinity of and they would be connecting to the Palatine low-pressure sewer system. Under current policies, as I just mentioned, they would be ineligible. In the executive recommendation that came over on this request, staff noted that there's been a lot of improvements in the system over the past 20 years, and there may be the potential, and I emphasize may be, the potential for additional capacity that could serve properties like this. Staff had suggested that we look at this in the context of the policy first, and then deal with the category change after that. And staff's recommendation is that further study is needed on the capacity issues here. And I did want to note also in the addendum to the packet that's at the end of this packet, we received additional information from WSSC Water regarding some of the concerns they'd be looking at in this area. Many of the improvements in the past 20 years were done to address properties already served. And there's, depending on how this property would be served and how many other properties might connect, it's unclear what the capacity potential is here, or what the volume of additional capacity that is needed is. So for those reasons, staff suggests that we have DEP and WSSC Water do further study. I don't think, I noted in the packet that we could include language in the plan regarding this additional study, but given that it's a relatively short turnaround, I don't know if that's really needed. But the accompanying request, the Mohebe request, would then be deferred pending completion of that study. And anything
What's a
that comes out
relatively
of that.
short turnaround mean?
Well, I'll ask staff to talk more about that.
Alan Sukup with DEP. We could probably complete that work with WSSC Water in a few months. Normally, deferrals are expected to be resolved within 1 year to come back to the council. But I think we could do it certainly before then.
Now, what we would hopefully get out of this study would be what, if any, conclusions regarding additional capacity there are, and how we might recategorize this restriction, and how many properties might be able to connect, whether it's Mohebe or others. But we're just not sure at this point, even with Mohebe, whether additional capacity would be needed downstream to help serve this property, or...
I thought we were in that case. I mean, his contention, I don't have the map, but was that his property is the only one that would be served by...
Well, if it were to be, there's a couple different ways it could be served. If it was the only property to be served based on one of the alignments, it's unlikely one property is going to tip the balance. On the other hand, if another alignment is chosen and there's abutting properties that would then want to connect as well and would have an abutting argument for connection, then we're talking about a little bit more of a complication.
In the Mohebe situation, there's at least one additional property that could be served from a relatively short extension needed to serve the Mohebe property. If an extension is put in that would serve the house on the Mohebe property directly, and this has got kind of strange geometry to it, then as many as 5 properties could be served. Plus, there are several other properties at the south end of the subdivision that are adjacent and could qualify. There are a number of properties on the west side of the subdivision that could qualify because they abut or are adjacent to the Palatine subdivision. Extensions for those properties would require much more substantive extensions on the order of thousands of feet. And so our feeling is those are not reasonable to consider, but we want to sit down with WSSC and go through the options there to make sure we've covered everything.
The other important point is this restriction is a longstanding restriction, and we would be concerned about making a individual case exception. I'd rather have the study looked at and a policy considered by the council, and then let the approvals, if there are any, flow from that, rather than do an exception up front.
So to that point, Mr. Levchenko, it's, according to the packet, the policy restriction was basically predicated on the Potomac sub-region master plan, right?
Yeah, it exists in the 2002 plan. There's language that explicitly restricts service. Now,
Well, so
Yeah.
so the point that I'm getting at is that was enacted or adopted in 2002. So is that coming up anytime soon? Do we know what the work plan might be?
I don't
Planning
believe it's.
staff doesn't know. Okay.
I don't believe it's on the planning board's work plan. You are correct.
I mean, ideally, we would want to do this comprehensively, and if the restriction is based on that, then we would take that up and go in whatever direction we choose. But it doesn't sound like that is Mr. Sartori.
Yes, Jason Sartori, for the record, with the Planning Department. No, this is not on our current work program, and it's not something that we were preparing for our FY24 request.
Okay.
Yeah, the fact that the plan is old and that there have been improvements in the system that have been, put in place in the last 20 years, I think that does merit another look by us to see if the circumstances have changed sufficiently to consider some exceptions that we would note in the 10-year water and sewer plan for this.
So the perfect not being an option of having a more comprehensive review of this, I'm open to staff recommendation for a feasibility study of sorts.
So, Mr. Mohebi has shared with us the, expenses that he's had for his system that I think would pass a common sense test as a failing system, but isn't failing according to DPS. So how do we resolve that?
Well, if the system is in fact failing, it would have to be documented by DPS.
Right.
And then he could connect.
He's had sewage in his house.
Right.
So I don't know what's the test that he has to pass if that is not a failing system?
Well, he would need to reach out to permitting services, and they would come out and inspect. I mean, I guess Mr. Sukup or Ms. Benham, do you want to speak to that?
Permitting services has not decided this is a failing system. That's what, we've been talking about the same house for 3 years, I think.
Heidi Benham, DPS. So in a case like that, assuming that the property owner has reached out to us, they would apply for a septic repair evaluation. So our inspector would go meet a contractor out at the site. We, also do an interview with the homeowner, see what's been going on, and then determine, backing up into the house is considered a failure. However, the solution may depend on why the failure is happening. So the failure may be able to be remedied by fixing a clogged pipe or poorly installed crossover. But yes, if there is sewage in the house, it's a failure. And then it's a determination of, okay, how do we find a solution to the failure? Sometimes that's a public sewer connection if it's available. But it doesn't always mean a total replacement of the septic system either.
So if there's sewage in the house, it's a failure, but it's not a failing system?
It could be. So it's failing.
What are your records in this case?
I don't know if I'm
This has been
familiar
before
with
us.
the property. What's the street address?
It's Centurion Way?
Is this a sand mound system?
Yes.
Okay.
Our understanding is that the property owner has done several small-scale repairs on pipes in the system, but we do not have a confirmed failure that requires replacement of the system at this point. That would need to go through the process Ms. Benham has described.
What do you consider a small-scale repair?
Replacing a pipe or rotoring one out, replacing elements within the system, as she said, a crossover pipe, or because this is an unusual configuration where the house is separated from the sand mound systems by a distance of a couple hundred feet, there could be problems in the outfall pipe that are the property owner is having to deal with. This is an oddly shaped property. It's like, I want to say 2 dumbbells, but it's like a dumbbell with the house on one end and the septic systems on the other. And it's the part of the property that has the septic systems that is adjacent to Palatine.
Right. What about replacing an aerator and a plug? Is that considered minor?
Yes, it's not, they do not have to create a new sand mound system. Sand mounds are complicated. There is a pump in the mound that raises the septic effluent to the top of the mound so it can drain through. It does not operate by gravity, unfortunately.
And I will just add that anything to speak to what Alan's talking about, anything that doesn't involve replacement of the septic tank or pump chamber or the drain field, so in this case the sand mound, would generally fall under a repair that's minor in nature, that would not need a septic permit.
I mean, I don't think our system's working, quite well when we hear reports like this. So I've said that before. I don't understand why that's not a failing system. And he shared thousands of dollars of expenses that he's incurred, and he's proposing, obviously, many thousands more. So, and he's not the only one. He's one of somebody that is able to, spend that money. So, to me, the policy needs revision. But I wouldn't prefer to wait several more months to grant some relief.
Well, I mean, we have a lot of experience with the failed septic system process, and most of these are approved administratively. The council doesn't even see them. So, every few months, we typically have 1 or 2 that get approved.
Right.
But the key is that we have an established process that goes through DPS and DEP. So it seems to be working pretty well. Can someone have a system that needs repair? Absolutely. But we rely on DPS to let us know when it rises to the level of where they recommend that the ultimate solution for the site is a connection to public sewer. And that requires 2 things. One, that the system is, needs to be replaced, but also that sewer is somewhat reasonable to get to that property. In this case, sewer isn't far away, so that looks like it's potentially available. But we have the policy issue that is of concern, a longstanding policy restriction in that area. If the policy restriction wasn't there, we'd be having a different conversation, perhaps.
Right. No, I understand that. Councilmember Reamer?
don't have any wise thoughts here. I don't know if there is an artful solution that provides for a path without creating precedents. That's typically what we look for. So, what do you see that's closest to that?
Well, I think having WSC Water and DEP really firm up what the capacity issues are in that system, and if there is excess capacity and that's serving, properties in a certain manner, how many could be served, where. If we determine that's feasible, then I think the council can consider either a blanket policy that if capacity is determined to be available for a property, that they could apply, or we determine that a certain area could be served. But I think the way we're looking at it would be a compromise in a way. We're not looking at having to reopen the master plan, which would be the cleanest way to do it. But as you've heard, there's no plans to reopen the master plan. It's 20 years old.
I don't want to do that.
It's a little old. It doesn't reflect the current reality on the ground there. So I think the compromise is to try to pursue this through the water and sewer plan, but do it with the best information we have, which right now what we have is concerns raised by WSSC Water about generally serving that area with this restricted, low-pressure sewer.
Did you say there was an option where the property would not be allowed to accept any, like the connection that would be built would not be, no one else would be eligible to also connect to it?
Well, if it abuts other properties, those properties would generally be eligible through the abutting mains policy. And depending on the alignment for this, one or more properties would be abutting. So there's that issue too. It's not just the Mojave request, but depending on how the alignment is done, it could affect one or more properties.
Do you know how many we're talking about?
Did you mention that?
We
That's different
counted,
than what we've heard from the applicant.
we counted 4 in addition to Mr. Mojave's property.
4.
With the shortest extension needed, there would be 1 additional property that would abut that sewer line.
I mean, I'm in favor of doing things where we can craft a policy that I think is a good policy and, rest this on grounds that are solid grounds. So I think we're looking for that here. And at this point, I'm open to what that could be. I hadn't,
And that's what we're struggling with here.
yeah.
I think once we have a little bit more firm information with DEP and WSSC Water working on this, that'll give us a better sense of what the possibilities are there and what may be a reasonable policy exception for the council to consider, as opposed to approving this request because legitimate concerns about the septic system, but then this request would have to go to the state. There's no policy, there's no existing policy that we could point to allow for this, and the state very well might reject it. So we'd be back to where we are anyway.
Providing us with some time to work with WSSC on the local and the overall capacity issues here would also give us an opportunity to work with DPS to try to sort out what exactly the problems are on the applicant's property, whether or not providing public sewer under those circumstances would resolve those problems. Again, if it's a question of difficulties with the piping, that kind of issue might continue, even though the property is connected to public sewer, when we're not using sand mount systems. So that would give the applicant, a property owner, an opportunity to work with DPS more closely to sort out exactly what is going on with that system.
So you haven't met with the applicant in that case,
I've talked with the applicant, yes.
but not seen the property?
No, I have not been out to the property specifically. Well, I have been out to the property, I just have not met with the applicant on the property and it would really need to be with DPS to determine what's going on.
Correct. I'm surprised that hasn't already happened. That's disappointing. And this capacity study has never been done in this area,
That's correct.
despite the number of category change requests we.
This is the first category change request we have encountered in 20 years that raises a question of whether or not you could have a property that's adjacent to Palatine served by public sewer. The assumption was, let me give a little background. The assumption was back in 2002, that the Palatine low-pressure system was so tightly engineered that it was simply not possible to accept additional connections into the system. Now, over time, some changes have been made to that system because of difficulties they've had within the system itself. And that may open up a door for Mr. Mohebi's property to be served from the Palatine system. As WSSC Water has indicated, they would need to do a careful engineering study of the capacity in that system to determine whether just one property, two properties, maybe more properties at this end, this is the far end of the system, could be accommodated. But it's the first time that we've dealt with Palatine in 20 years, and it's the first time that we've had an indication that some ability for that system to handle additional flow is possible.
Okay, so if we do the capacity study, are you all going to meet with the applicant on his property and try and solve this problem and suggest any alternatives?
I would be happy to meet with DPS and the property owner at the site.
That's the sort of thing council members do, every week. So
Yep.
we'd like to see the executive branch doing that as well. I would personally. Colleagues?
I'll say again, I support the staff recommendation as we've worked through the difficulties here. I still think the best approach would be to revise or take another look at the master plan, but that is not an option, right? So that we could look at this holistically, and short of that, rather than having an individual precedent-setting property by property discussion and a discussion that would go on for years with every property owner, I think this is the best path forward, as muddled as it might be.
Can I just share for my colleagues' benefit? I think probably the last thing in the world you want to do is a master plan on this topic. I mean, we have warfare over isolated applications. Can you imagine when there are hundreds of properties on the line?
I think we should put it on next year's agenda.
It's like, it will take your entire work program and literally put it in the sewer. So I don't advise that.
Okay. So do we have a plan? You'll have a meeting and we'll begin the capacity study, and it'll take no longer than a couple months? Yes. Okay.
The next item I want to talk about actually is, we had talked briefly about the Glen Hills study area and the issue of on-site systems survey requirements. And getting back to the master plan issue, back in 2016, I believe, I'm looking at my notes here, the council approved some changes in the 10-year water and sewer plan related to the Glen Hills area, but noted that further changes really should be done within the master plan context. Now, we've just had a long discussion about how unlikely the master plan is to come up, but the council is on record in resolution, I believe it's 18423, supporting an amendment to the Potomac subregion master plan to look at sewer and septic issues in the Glen Hills area. So if and when the master plan is revisited, at least this area should be looked at, as well as some of the other sewer issues that have been discussed. We really do have a patchwork of service in that area, and a lot of the category change requests that we see are related to the confusion and differing policies that apply in different areas within the master plan area. And Glen Hills is one of the larger areas where we've had a lot of discussion, and the council spent a tremendous amount of time on Glen Hills 6 years ago and made some changes to make the area the area and where it and its circumstances outside the planned service area more consistent with other areas like it elsewhere in the county. So we were able to accomplish that. But to go beyond that, the council felt would require that next big step of a master plan amendment. So that's reiterated in my packet here today. The other issue that we had heard from folks in testimony regarding Glen Hills was the requirements to establish septic system or on-site system survey areas. And the council, as part of the 2018 water and sewer plan, tightened those restrictions to require that there be at least one documented failure in an area that's to be studied. And we happen to have an area that was under review in Glen Hills that did not meet that criteria, and so that study was suspended. And what you heard in the public hearing testimony on the 10-year plan was an interest in restarting that study. But that would require a change in the countywide policy. And given the fact that this was a fairly recent change made by the prior council, a majority of which are still sitting on the council today, staff did not support revisiting that at this time. Once again, I think the ultimate solution for Glen Hills would be a master plan amendment. So staff does not recommend any additional changes in the 10-year plan. The executive did not recommend any changes regarding this, and neither does staff.
I think we're okay with that.
All right.
Okay.
Now, the last issue today, which I think will take up the most discussion, deservedly so, is the draft commercial sewer service policy. We discussed this a bit at the September meeting, and the committee was very interested in moving forward with this in some manner and having some criteria to look at. So staff did include in this packet some criteria that had been worked on with additional discussions with executive staff and planning department staff. And let me just swing here. So what you have on the screen is the recommendations that were in my the original staff report for today. Subsequent to that, we had additional comments received from executive staff and some thoughts that this policy should be looked at in the context of the criteria that we have in the private institutional facilities policy. Once again, another policy that the council has dealt with a lot over the past couple of decades. And the reason that policy is important is because it in similar ways to the commercial sewer service policy, it establishes some criteria whereby properties that are otherwise ineligible for service can apply for service. And the rationale being that there's a county benefit to be gained by providing this flexibility and providing this case-by-case review ultimately by the council. So based on that, staff did do an amended an addendum to the packet that looks at comparing the private institutional facilities policy with the draft commercial sewer service policy that you have before you. And so I'm going to flip to a chart that gets us sort of a quick way to look at this. Let me find it. Here we are. So now the chart you see on your screen looks at the major elements of the private institutional facilities policy and the draft commercial sewer service policy to see where there's areas of commonality and where there may be some differences or silence. And I think this is helpful because the PIF policy has evolved over many years, and at least staff feels in the last 5 or 6 years has actually worked pretty well in terms of the council's case-by-case review. So just starting at the top of the chart, the PIF policy is the middle option shown, or the middle column, and then the draft commercial sewer service policy that I included in my original packet is on the right side, and you can see the major elements. And there's several areas of commonality, and I think actually even some of the areas where there's some silence, I think we could include language in the commercial sewer service policy without significant impact to what we're trying to do. But I would say that the one major area that was changed back in the 2018 Water and Sewer Plan was the requirement going forward that private institutional facilities requests had to submit a concept plan to the Development Review Committee. This is the interagency committee chaired by planning department staff that review preliminary proposals. In this case, they'd be reviewing a concept plan, and they provide that feedback and commentary to DEP on the front end of their category change review process. And the reason for this is so that the council ultimately has the best information it can about what in this case, a PIF is requesting and what they're seeking to do on the property where they would be getting this category change approval. And then what's happened as the council has looked at this, and if they are supportive, then they frame their approval as consistent, or their approval is contingent upon the approval by the planning board of a subdivision that is consistent with the concept plan. So the concept plan becomes the hook that allows the council to say, okay, here's what we're approving and here's what we're approving it for, and we have some confidence that that's what will ultimately be approved when the later land use processes work out. Without the concept plan, you're left with more conjecture about what may ultimately happen on a site, especially with new development, where you don't, the applicant could meet the constraints of the site in a lot of different ways. So the concept plan provides that element of what's really going to be happening going forward. So that's why you see the yes under the concept plan reviewed by Development Review Committee for the PIF policy, but we don't have that right now shown under the commercial sewer service policy. And then the companion of the conditional approval process I mentioned also is here, where applicable, where they have to go through this later process. And once again, the commercial policy doesn't have the concept plan approach built into it, and so you don't have that either. So in both cases, I think the council is looking at trying to provide exceptions in cases where we feel there's a county interest. There is a lot of commonality in terms of how you might want to structure these policies. On the other hand, that adds a layer of additional work that would be required. So there's this balancing act. And more to the moment, we have a couple of deferred requests that the council has that have been waiting upon potential change in or potential policy be developed. Those requests have not gone through this process, and they do not have concept plans developed or reviewed by the Development Review Committee. So that would add a layer of process that they had not had to go through yet. Given the time frame where we are with this council in the election year, and with the requirements that deliberations on the water and sewer plan cannot occur after October 31st, this kind of measure within the 10-year plan would mean effectively the next council would have to deal with these deferred requests. I know the council had expressed or the committee had expressed an interest in trying to get through all the deferred requests it could within the time frame it could as the current council. So that's another tension we have here, is the time frame versus trying to come up with a plan we think is, or a policy that is consistent with a similar policy that we already have in the plan. So staff does not have a perfect answer for you today. I think we can I can work with executive staff on some options and try to bring them back to the council in the next week or so. But I think it does make sense, I think, to consider a concept plan process for commercial properties, whether that's all requests or certain types of requests. It's possible if you come up with a scenario for the commercial sewer service policy, that may inform how we may want to do the PIF policy going forward as well. So it's one of the more challenging issues, trying to decide how to create this new policy from scratch and how much to borrow from what we've learned from the PIF policy. I think with that, I'll turn it back to the council for questions. Like I said, I don't have a recommendation today on this. It would be helpful to get a sense of the committee, what their priorities are here, and we could consider different options the committee could consider for moving forward.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate your time in crafting this for our consideration. I think it addresses a public benefit, a public need. I think it is well tailored to create a policy that has, a very narrow path, and I think I think it will enhance the county to have this opportunity for the few property owners that will qualify. So I'm generally enthusiastic about it. And I like the additional, parts of the process that you've highlighted, like having a concept plan. I think that makes sense. So I just have two things for what we're looking at here. One, I don't understand this idea that there's a subsequent approval by WSSC. It seems to me we want to approve something, and if there's some problem the WSSC has, that's between WSSC and the applicant, I guess. But
Right, and actually, I do address that in the addendum. I forgot to bring that up.
okay.
In further discussions with executive staff, I think we're stating the purpose of having that language is to make clear that the policy does not supersede WSSC Water's authority to approve these extensions and look at all the capacity issues and everything else. But that's true of all of these policies. That's true of the PIF policy. That's true of any extensions anywhere. WSSC Water has to weigh in and say that, yes, we're supportive of it. So my suggestion to executive staff, and I think they thought it would work, is rather than identify this particular policy to show that language, included in a more general section regarding WSSC Water's responsibilities, to note that it's broader than just this policy. It's across the board. So as you note, we're not picking on this policy to say you have to go through an additional process. It's just recognizing that they, like everyone else, do have to go through that process and get WSSC's approval of an extension needed to serve the applicant. So
That makes sense.
So my suggestion is that staff can work with executive staff to craft that more general language that would appear elsewhere in the plan, and then we could remove that draft language from what you're seeing in the staff report.
Thank you for that. Second item is the concept plan. So I think that makes sense for applicants to do that. I'm concerned because we have been working here through this committee for, I think, at least a year, maybe a year and a half, on the application that has come in, that we would, I think, like to see allowed. And I think the best way to proceed is to insist that this new applicant, or this applicant, does do a concept plan. However, we could provide a contingent approval that in order for us, for the approval to take effect, they have to then, proceed with their concept plan. So they wouldn't have to go back to the square one and resubmit everything, they could submit the concept plan. But agreeing with the basic approach here that a concept plan is a desirable thing, and after this application is in, there shouldn't be any concern about whether an applicant would have done that or not.
Well, I think I know the applicants, as part of their original application, did submit some information about or some drawings and other information in the application request that would be part of what a concept plan would be.
Right.
I don't know if it fully encompasses that. I'm just sort of thinking out loud whether that could be referred to
Sure.
in the absence of a concept plan, since they submitted their request before this requirement. Looks like, Alan, did you want to suggest?
Yes, my finger's inching towards the
Yeah.
button here.
Mhm.
The applicants did provide a sketch, if you will, of how their sites would lay out, both the Potomac Oak Center and the old White House Country Inn site. A concept plan is very flexible, and we could work with Park and Planning to, who's already seen this actually, but to try to determine if that would qualify as a concept plan that they could comment on.
Okay.
There's no application fee for a concept plan. We chose that avenue because, again, it was very broad-based, but also cheap.
Okay. Great.
But once again, I don't know the timing of how, I'm not sure, I mean, we are in a very tight time frame if this council is to act.
Well, that's the issue. I would
Yeah.
really appreciate if we could conclude this matter, and then we'll hand off the new policy and future applications, and the new policy will go together in the next council. But this body of work, we could bring to a conclusion with a conditional approval that they have an agreement over. Yeah, I'm not, if you can tell us precisely what the wording
Right.
is.
Well, and I am working with the clerk to schedule some time for these deferred requests later in October. I can work with executive staff and planning department staff to see if there's if there's a way to accomplish what you're suggesting, and we could bring that back to the committee as part of that discussion. We're looking at mid-October timeframe.
Back to the committee, or even if necessary, to the full council, but yeah.
Right. I mean, that would be, it'd have to be by then in order to turn it around for October 25th, which is the last scheduled council
Exactly.
meeting. So we can certainly do that. But if the committee is supportive of the concept plan approach in general going forward in the 10-year plan, that would be helpful for staff.
Right.
Because then we could craft the appropriate language for the 10-year plan revision.
So
And
I suggest that to I support your recommendation. Suggest that for the committee.
And what we would do is tailor it somewhat on what the private institutional facility policy requires. Might have to be some nuance there, given it's a different category of applicant, but we'll try to work from that. But I think that would be helpful to have the committee's guidance on that today.
I agree wholeheartedly with everything Councilmember Raymer just said to try and wrap this up as much as we can within this council and this committee, and then leave the new policy and the new direction for the next council and whoever serves on this committee. I agree.
All right, so I'm assuming that's a 3-0, supportive of the concept plan being added to the draft policy, and staff will also be working on those particular category change requests that we're working to schedule for council or committee review in a couple of weeks. And by the way, there are other deferred requests as well based on what you've done today that would also be coming back on that day. And then presumably acted on by the council at this, immediately after the 10-year plan. I believe those were it for the issues today. Like I said, all of the issues that we've gone over or that the executive had brought up and that the committee had supported are noted in the original staff report. And If the committee members have any questions about those, please let me know as soon as possible so we can get those addressed in time for council action later this month. But based on today, if we can conclude the 10-year plan discussion, we can begin working towards the necessary work to get the council review work session process going in late October.
And just to be,
I think we're good.
So-
Thank you all for joining us.
All right, thank you.
Okay, welcome everybody. Next item on our agenda is Bill 1222. Thanks for your great packet, Ms. Ndu. Let me turn it over to you.
So Bill 1222 is a bill we received from the county executive via DPS about the licenses for electricians. So there was a public hearing. I'm sure the committee members have all received it. There was a lot of testimony in opposition to the creation of a low voltage license. Some safety concerns about installation of fire alarms and cable systems and whether that's dangerous. Council also received a letter that was in support but asked for an expansion of the homeowners exemptions. So I will do the amendments at the end because I think that's a bit easier. There's a fiscal impact statement, said there could be a net loss of $200,000 a year. While, yes, that is true of the bill, that's because the state assumed a lot of the electrical licensing process, and this bill is to just make sure we're consistent with what the state did. Similarly, the economic impact statement actually said there'd be a positive impact because DPS will have more time to work on other things. And in addition, it'll decrease the average time for solar applications because a large part of this bill is how those solar applications are handled as well. And there's an addendum. We did receive a letter, a joint industry letter in support, particularly of those solar provisions. So as background, the racial equity statement said little to no impact. So as background, the Maryland Electricians Act was passed in May 2021, and it did several different things, including authorizing the issue of licenses for licensed apprenticed electricians, journey person electricians, as well as master electrician license, limited what local jurisdictions could do in terms of licensing. For the most part, we could do registration still, but not that licensing piece anymore. So Bill 1222 takes all of Chapter 17, which is why it's pretty lengthy, and just makes it consistent with the state's bill. That includes removing the Montgomery County Board of Electrical Examiners, since all of those jobs are now going to be handled by the state. Jurisdiction over appeals will instead be given to the Board of Appeals, which makes sense. Many definitions and other provisions were removed, including there was actually a local license for a low voltage electrician, so that was changed. And then the homeowner's licensing was retained because a state license is required to provide service for compensation, and homeowners licenses just don't fit that category. So I guess next up, I will talk about the removal of that low voltage license. We did receive a letter from the county executive supporting that removal, which is included as an addendum to this packet. So just for everybody who's curious, the low voltage electrical services include installation, repair, or maintenance of systems such as fire alarm systems, cable systems, telephone, audio, video, computer network wiring, and systems at or below 50 volts. So there is one question that's raised if we remove the low voltage license, and that is by removing that license requirement, is the council now saying you don't need a license at all to do that work, or you need a master license or some other type of state license to do that work, which are two opposite approaches, frankly, if you remove this category. So it kind of depends how the bill is amended. If you just take out the low voltage license section on how to get that license, then that means state licensure would still be required, because there's two other sections of the bill that say you cannot engage in providing electrical services unless licensed by the State Board of Electricians. And then our definition of electrical services, if you took low voltage out, would include that low voltage work. So the part that gets tricky is the state does not require its licensing to do low voltage work. So if you take it out of the bill, then that would mean that the county is requiring a state license to do low voltage work, even though the state doesn't require its license to do that work, which is what I believe the union is asking for. One other caveat here is we have not heard from low voltage workers. From what I hear from DPS, they're obviously not, they don't have those same unions, that same organization. I mentioned that in case there was a desire to do more outreach, because in effect you would be requiring low voltage workers in the county to get something that they didn't previously need. So that's the first amendment before the committee, is which way they want to go with the low voltage license and what effect you would like the removal to have.
Right. Does DPS have a recommendation on that matter?
Good afternoon, Rick Merck, Division Chief for Commercial
thank you.
Building Construction and the County Fire Marshal. Yes, absolutely. I'd just like to make a statement that it had been inferred possibly that there was going to be, or there could be, an issue of safety. So even whichever way council decides to go, whether it is asking for or requiring a state master license at this time, at least until the state decides to whether to have a low voltage license or not for the state, and they're at least discussing that possibility. We still would continue to issue a permit and have an inspector inspect the work. So there is no decrease in any way of safety or workmanship or anything involved with that.
Okay. So what's your recommendation? What's the executive branch recommendation?
We believe at this moment it's probably a better position to require and streamline the process to require a master electrician to be able to pull any permit, basically, that of something happening. And then it would be a very easy transition to, if they have a specialty license for low voltage, that would just automatically occur.
If the electrician does.
If the state, decided to create one, then it would just flow down through us.
Right. And did they opine on what the timeline might be?
Reading through the legislative history, it actually was originally in the bill, and then the bill at the state level took quite some time. There was a lot of debate on this issue, and they removed it from the bill, and then specifically at the end of the act said, none of this applies to low voltage. We didn't talk about that. That's paraphrasing. So yeah, I can't tell you a timeline for the state. I could say they spent a lot of time on it and did not make a decision.
Right. Okay. Yeah, not surprising. Okay. Colleagues? Go ahead.
I'm really sorry. I had to step away. I couldn't not take that call. So, could you please?
So So the recommendation from the county executive is to remove the low voltage license. Basically, this bill created a new process for a low voltage license. And the county executive, in response to the union, such as IBEW, has said, let's take that out. That could go two ways. Either that means the county is going to require state licensure to do low voltage work, or the county saying we're taking it out and no licensure will be required to do that work. But of course, as DPS noted, you still have to pull a permit, there'd still be inspections. It's just what level of licensure will be required for low voltage.
Good. Well, I'm fine leaving it there. I don't think there should be a licensure requirement. I think with the pace of change in the solar industry as it is, I think this is a good time. We're hearing so much from Democratic elected officials at the national level, Joe Biden on down, about licensing reform. And I just think for stuff that's really simple like this, we could provide an alternative path. So we're not deciding that. We're just saying we won't subject that to this law, right? As it was also drafted.
Right, so we would remove, so the bill would remove all references to the low voltage, which would in effect mean no license is required to pull a permit to do low voltage work.
Right, low voltage work. Which
Yes.
is just one specific category.
Yes.
Okay.
And most solar is low voltage or not?
It depends, right?
Rick?
Two separate issues.
Yeah.
Two totally separate issues. So there still is a license required under a master's license would be required to do solar for sure.
Okay.
Under 50 volts, which would be Ethernet and other low voltage kinds of cabling.
Like an alarm system or
An
something.
alarm system.
That's what I just wanted to
Usually
point
around
out.
24
I didn't
volts.
think the low voltage issue.
Right, if
removal
we
of
take that
language
out,
has
it's
anything
still
to
in
do
the
with solar.
code, it still
Right.
gets a permit and an inspection.
Yep.
However, we're discussing whether the person or the entity that comes to ask for that permit, whether they need a license from the state or not.
Right.
Okay. So then it's not solar, I guess.
Right.
I'll jump in. So I appreciate you enumerating what low voltage is. Are there any other examples you can provide?
I'll lean on my colleague.
Is it in the packet, Ms. Udo? I'm sorry.
So there is a, sorry.
Cable.
There is a definition,
systems.
and the definition says, including installation, repair, or maintenance of fire alarm, cable, telephone, audio, video, computer network, and all systems operating at or below 50 volts.
So my read on that is those are different types of jobs requiring different types of skills, all with their own technical training, and hooking it up to a power source happens to be probably the last thing they have to do, one of the last things they have to do in those processes. Clearly, I'm not in that trade, right? So I speak. I'm not exactly an expert in that. But if the state doesn't have it, and we're wrestling with this quandary, and it might be taken up by the state, I would think for people throughout the DC region to be able to work in Howard County, Frederick County, Montgomery County, and Prince George's County and allow their mobility in their trade, and for them to have the best economic outcome, there should be some continuity. And until the state changes that or any other surrounding jurisdictions, I think we should conform for the benefit of those in those industries.
Conform which way? Don't not require a state
So
license?
to not require a license.
Okay,
Conform with the other jurisdictions.
got it. Not have a separate Montgomery County requirement. Fine? And none of the groups that weighed in on the proposal to have a county low voltage took a position on this? Or they did?
So the testimony received from IBEW said they They did not want this low voltage requirement because it took work away from from people who have a master license.
Right.
So I think
That's a different point.
the interpretation would be that they expected that taking it out would mean requiring a master license, is how I would read that testimony, since their argument is it's unsafe to do this without the licenses that took years, such as the state licensure. But their only request was to take this requirement out of the bill.
Right, but they're not, that license isn't required to do the work currently, specifically for the low voltage work.
Correct. It's not required by the state currently.
So anyway, I'm not sure about the inference, but, okay, I think we're fine. We'll wait on the state to take action on this.
So there is one more amendment. There was a letter requesting expanding the allowance for the homeowner's exemption, asking for it to include low voltage and communication systems. Council staff's recommendation at this time is not to go forward with this amendment. Right now, the homeowner exemption already includes any work or wiring done within your home that's not for compensation. You can do that yourself. So no amendment is proposed at this time, but I wanted to mention it because we received a letter about it.
And Amendment 1 also removed the definition of low voltage, right? Not just the requirement.
Yes, so for Amendment 1, I'm going to go through the whole bill, and every time it says low voltage, hit delete.
Okay, great. Okay, I'm fine with the staff recommendation on number 2, sorry. Anybody else? Everybody good? Okay, I think we're without objection. Easy peasy. All right, thanks everyone. I think we're adjourned.